Ever since I retired, my wife Nancy had shown an unusual interest in my severance package. The day after the severance pay was deposited, Nancy was nowhere to be found. I had been waiting for this moment, though a part of me always feared something like this might happen. When Nancy finally returned home, I confronted her. "Thank you, David, for all your hard work," my colleague said as I retired from the company I had worked at for over 20 years. "I'm David Brown, 65 years old, and recently retired. My family consists of my wife, Nancy, who is 60, and our son, Richard, who's married and lives on his own." On the evening of my retirement, Nancy poured me a beer and prepared a feast. Since the afternoon, pasta, fried chicken, and even my favorite dumplings in various styles. "You've made so much. Thank you. It looks delicious. Let's eat," I said. Since our son moved out, it's just been Nancy and me. I'm not much of a talker, but Nancy always kept the conversation lively during meals, sharing gossip about her friends, celebrity news, or complaining about her clothes getting tight. I enjoyed my meal while nodding along. "You've officially retired now, right?" Nancy asked as I was eating. "Yes, that's right. Is that why you made such a grand meal?" Nancy isn't the best cook, but she occasionally puts in the effort to make a special meal for me. Regardless of the taste, I'm always grateful when she cooks for me. "Yeah, sort of. So now that you've retired, you'll get that, right? The retirement package?" she asked hesitantly. If I had received the retirement package, it should be deposited by next month. Nancy's face lit up, her eyes sparkling. "Then we just have to wait a month for the details, probably," I replied. Nancy was in a great mood all night. About a month later, I checked our account. "How much did you get?" Nancy asked eagerly. "Around $100,000. It's all in the account." "Wow, that much?" Nancy covered her mouth in surprise. She was astonished by the amount, even after deductions for state and federal taxes. If I had held a higher position, I could have earned more, but dwelling on it now that I'm retired is pointless. Still, I feel a twinge of regret, wondering if I could have been promoted had I pushed a bit harder. Nevertheless, I've retired, and I worked hard in my own way. From here on out, I'll make the most of my severance package and pension. "Let's celebrate your severance pay," Nancy exclaimed as she brought out a bunch of beers. We usually limited ourselves to 1 beer a day, unless it was a special occasion, so this was unusual. Feeling liberated from work, I happily indulged in more beer than usual. The next day, my head was pounding from drinking too much beer the night before. I had crashed into bed and passed out. Glancing at the clock, it was 11 a.m. I used to wake up at 5 on weekdays, but beer had gotten the best of me. "My head is killing me. Do we have any aspirin?" I called out, but Nancy wasn't there. She wasn't in the living room either, but there was a document and a small note on the table. "I'm going on a trip for a week starting today. Please sign this," the note read. A trip. This was news to me. I glanced at the other document. It was a divorce paper signed by Nancy. "What a shock," I muttered to myself, crumpling the note written in her handwriting. I immediately called her. "What's the deal with this sudden divorce?" I asked, hearing the bustle of the outside world over the line, along with what sounded like a train station announcement. "We're both retired now, so let's be free. We'll split the assets. Just sign the papers and file them," Nancy replied, her voice sounding different, higher-pitched and more abrupt than usual. The bombshell of divorce made my hangover vanish instantly. "I can't just accept a snap divorce. Come home and let's talk this through," I pleaded. "I'm boarding the train now, so I can't stay on the phone. I'll be back when my trip's over, so file the papers by then," she said, and the call abruptly cut off. I slumped into a chair, drained. Split the assets? No way. I jumped up and yanked open the drawer where we kept our valuables. The bank book and seal were gone. We managed our joint account with my salary and Nancy's part-time earnings, and of course my severance pay was in there too. She had taken the bank book, realizing all our assets were gone. My mind went blank. No wonder she had been so fixated on money. On my retirement day, we still hadn't paid off the mortgage, and a pension alone wouldn't suffice. Should I call the cops since she took the bank book? But without knowing where she went, there wasn't much they could do. Besides, the police might not want to get involved in a domestic spat. Wait, I still have that. Just as I thought I was at my wit's end, I remembered my ace in the hole. I opened my desk drawer in the study to check on something. Good, it's still here. Even though the sudden divorce blindsided me, part of me had always seen this coming. I met Nancy through a mutual friend from a young age. She was bubbly and had a knack for making men feel special. She was always surrounded by guys, and I remember having plenty of competition. It was almost a miracle that I managed to date and marry her. Nancy was kind to me, and our married life seemed rosy. After we tied the knot, she became a full-time housewife, taking care of the home. She struggled with chores, often serving up kitchen disasters with an apologetic look that I found endearing. After our son Richard was born, I started pitching in with housework and child care to lighten Nancy's load. Knowing she was wiped out from childbirth, I'd rush home after work to whip up dinner for her. "This is delicious, thank you," she'd say. However, from that time on, while Nancy doted on our only son, she gradually became harsher towards me. While I'm wearing myself out with child care, you get to enjoy a leisurely drink by yourself. When I was feeding Richard, you were relaxing and watching TV. Now that he's asleep, is it such a big deal if I have a beer? Having a beer at the end of the day was my simple pleasure, but Nancy started to gripe about it. "You think you're hot stuff because you work and help with the baby, huh? God, it's so annoying, plus you reek." But I took a shower, I'd protest. Later, I learned that women's sense of smell can change after childbirth. They start to prefer their baby's scent, which shares their genes, but dislike their husband's. This revelation floored me. So that's why Nancy became more critical after giving birth. I started carrying deodorant and never skimped on hygiene to avoid turning her off. A few years after Richard's birth, Nancy's mood seemed to level out, and she wasn't as harsh with me. After Richard grew up and left the nest, Nancy started going out more and dumped the housework on me. I guess she wanted to cut loose after all those years of child rearing. I got swamped with work and never griped about her gallivanting. About a week later, while I was watching a daytime soap at home, the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor and saw Nancy, whom I hadn't seen in a week. "I've been waiting," Nancy said, holding the house key in her hand. "The door won't budge. Let me in." After she left, I changed the locks so the old key wouldn't work. Not wanting a scene on the doorstep, I let her in. "You filed the divorce papers at City Hall, right?" she asked. "I'm just here to confirm." "I haven't filed them yet," I replied. Nancy's eyes bulged. "What? What are you waiting for? You signed them, right? Hurry up and file them. I'm getting alimony from you." "There's no money for alimony. You swiped our joint bank book and took off," I said, looking around the house. Baffled, Nancy asked, "Then how have you been scraping by for the past week? Even with food in the fridge, you couldn't survive on that alone." "I had another account from my bachelor days," I said, pulling out a bank book from my pocket and flashing her the balance. $20,000. Where did that money come from? "I made some cash on stocks before we got hitched. I squirreled it away and never touched it. I quickly snapped the bank book shut and stuffed it back in my pocket. Then that's marital property, too. You really are the snake I thought you were." "What are you talking about? This isn't marital property. You agreed to that ages ago. Before we got married, I told you I wanted to earmark this money for my parents' care, and you were on board. Don't you remember signing the prenup?" "Oh, did I? This money was what was left after using it for my parents' care. My folks have already passed on, and our daily expenses came out of our shared account, so I'd completely forgotten about this bank book. Looking back, I'm glad we had the prenup. It saved me from going broke and starving. So, this money isn't marital property, and you should be the one paying alimony." I pointed squarely at Nancy. "I know everything. I know about your secret spending spree and your affair." Nancy's expression faltered. "You're making this up. I didn't have an affair." "Yes, Nancy, you had been stepping out with a younger man." "Having an affair? Where's your proof? You met the professor at your part-time gig in the cafeteria and had a fling, right? You probably went on a trip with him." "You've got it all wrong. I went on a trip with my mom friends." "You've got to believe me," Nancy said, staring me down. "But that's a load of bull. Women who are good at lying look people straight in the eye. Do you have any proof that I had an affair?" Nancy challenged defiantly. "If I lose here, I'd end up paying alimony. I hired a PI to catch you in the affair when I overheard you talking on the phone with him a few years back," I explained, recalling the moment vividly. "Yeah, that's right. My husband's retiring soon, so we can divorce." I thought she was gabbing with a mom friend and tried to tune it out, but when I heard divorce, I couldn't help but eavesdrop. I admitted, "Soon we can be out of the open." I was floored. I wanted to be dead certain she was really stepping out, so I quietly hired a detective to snoop around. The PI's report confirmed 100% that my wife was having an affair. Nancy started working part-time at the university cafeteria at 58, thanks to a mom friend's invite, and got tangled up with a professor there. I added. The detective snapped pics, and the guy was a rugged-looking dude in his late 50s. The PI got photo evidence. There were shots of them walking arm in arm and slipping into a hotel together. I showed Nancy the goods. There's no way she can wriggle out of this one. "So what if I cheated? I want to divorce you and be with him. Just sign the damn papers already." Nancy snapped, her frustration apparent. My love for her had fizzled out ages ago, but her defiant attitude was a gut punch. "You're the cheater, so you can't file for divorce. We're staying hitched until I say." As the betrayed spouse, she's the one who torpedoed the marriage. She can't just bail after having an affair. As Nancy and I locked horns, the doorbell chimed. I glanced at the monitor and spotted a familiar young face. It was Richard. "What? Richard, you're early." Nancy's face lit up when she realized our son had shown up, and she beelined for the door. I trailed behind her to greet Richard. "Richard, please help me. Your father is being a monster," Nancy exclaimed as she reached for Richard. But Richard shoved her away, and Nancy's eyes widened in shock. "Don't touch me, you cheater," he said sternly. Nancy laughed nervously and playfully tapped Richard's shoulder, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Richard, don't be so cold to your mom." Richard brushed her hand off. "Don't touch me. Dad spilled the beans about your affair. You're the worst." Nancy's face drained of color as her son rejected her. "While you were off gallivanting, Dad filled me in on everything after you split for your trip. He rang me and told me about the divorce papers and your affair." I didn't want to burden my son with such a bombshell, so I hesitated to tell him about the affair. But I decided he needed to know the truth before the divorce. I interjected. "I wanted it to be a lie. I was pissed at Dad for not telling me sooner, but I'm even more livid at you for cheating on him for 2 years," Richard continued, glaring at Nancy. "If you knew about the affair, why didn't you divorce her?" I asked, my voice tinged with disappointment. "Do you still have feelings for me?" Nancy asked, her voice faltering. When I uncovered the affair, I mulled over divorce countless times, but I held back. I didn't bring it up because I was waiting to snatch all your money and leave you high and dry with my severance pay, I admitted bitterly. I lived with Nancy, nursing my thirst for payback over her affair. Pick your poison, the assets or the man. I'm fine taking this to court through a lawyer. You're in deep water for cheating, and if you lose, your boy toy will probably lose interest. Men don't like getting tangled up in drama. I warned her. Nancy's face contorted, and tears welled in her eyes. He's a brainy university professor, right? He's got a cushy income and is still working, so he can bankroll you without my cash. Fine, I'll forfeit my share of the assets. Just cut me loose. I don't need your stinking money. Nancy spat out, defeated. Divorce settled. I'll link the divorce papers, and you sign this agreement, I stated firmly. We both signed the divorce papers and the agreement. Nancy chose a fresh start with her lover over keeping the money. Thanks for everything. The house is in my name, so you need to scram. Your stuff is boxed up outside. Take it and go, I said coldly, ending our tumultuous week. I packed all of Nancy's clothes and belongings into boxes and placed them outside. Nancy frantically checked through the boxes and let out a shriek. This is so heartless. Just because I strayed, she sobbed, turning to our son Richard for support. Richard, you're on my side, right? I'm your mother. Richard looked conflicted and remained silent. Just as I was about to speak, Nancy dropped a bombshell. While I'm here, my wife is pregnant. What? I was blindsided by the unexpected news, but Nancy was even more thunderstruck. She had been eagerly anticipating becoming a grandmother ever since Richard got married. She was eager to help with the baby, but the thought of her holding my grandchild with those cheating hands made my blood boil. I can't let a mother who cheated meet my child. I appreciate you raising me, but we're done. Don't ever darken my doorstep again, Richard said firmly. No, wait. Please, at least let me be there for the birth, Nancy pleaded desperately. But Richard kept her at arm's length. I'd never let someone like you into the delivery room. If anything happens to my wife or child, I'll never forgive you. Nancy, who had been eagerly counting down the days to her grandchild's birth, collapsed to her knees after being disowned by her son. She had thought she could cheat and still expect to cuddle her grandchild. You're both so cold-hearted. Don't you love your wife and mother? Nancy cried out in anguish. I lost all love for this woman ages ago. It wasn't just the cheating. There were other reasons, too, I explained. You don't love me either. That retirement dinner you threw was all frozen food, wasn't it? The lavish spread on the table for my retirement had been catered, and I had recognized the taste from my frozen lunches. It was delicious, but the knowledge that it was frozen food left me with mixed feelings. Love changes people, Richard added coldly. I no longer feel anything for you. I'm sorry. Please don't cast me aside. You are my world, Nancy pleaded again, reaching out to Richard. Don't touch me with those filthy hands. You should be begging Dad, not me, Richard replied sharply. Nancy was shell-shocked by Richard's fury. I'm sorry for cheating, Dad. I'll give back the money, Nancy said in a trembling voice, handing over the bank book and seal. What possessed you to cheat in the first place? I demanded. At first, it was just a fling for me, too, but the professor kept buttering me up, saying I was gorgeous. As we knocked back beers, things got out of hand, Nancy confessed tearfully. So you fell for a smooth-talking snake. I'm taking you and that sleazeball to court for alimony. Brace yourself, I exclaimed angrily. Nancy crumpled to her knees, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the consequences of her actions. I'm sorry, she broke down sobbing, apologizing repeatedly through the lawyer the PI had connected me with. I sued Nancy and her lover for alimony. Nancy, who had been crying, flew into a rage when served with the alimony papers. Why? I forfeited my share of the assets, and you've got your golden parachute. You're loaded. I don't even have 2 nickels to rub together. I've been put through the ringer because of your fling. You had a blast with your lover boy. Now it's time to face the music. Drag the professor here. I demanded. Reluctantly, Nancy dialed up her lover. The four of us, the lawyer, Nancy, her paramour, and I, hashed out the alimony. The professor confessed to the affair and admitted to their getaway. "You planning on putting a ring on her finger?" I asked, curious about where he stood. "Marriage? No way. I've got a ball and chain at home," he admitted. Turns out, this university professor was quite the Casanova. He confessed that his romp with Nancy was just for kicks, claiming he changes favorites like socks. The lawyer and I couldn't help but smirk at his lame excuse. "Anyway, you're coughing up alimony, too. If his wife finds out about the affair, he'll be on the hook for a pretty penny there, too. Nancy might even owe his wife alimony as well." Nancy, who had been genuinely smitten with him, looked like a deer in headlights upon learning he was married and saw their fling as just a bit of fun. She probably thought she'd coast on my dime, but her future now looked grim. I pocketed $30,000 in alimony from Nancy and her lover. I was sweating bullets about the statute of limitations for claiming alimony, which is 3 years from uncovering the affair, but it's finally put to bed. Nancy also got slapped with an alimony suit by her lover's wife, which her parents had to cover, leaving her not just broke, but in the hole. The university professor vanished from campus and is reportedly locked in a legal slugfest with his wife these days. Nancy's back at her parents' pad, weathering their icy glares and feeling like yesterday's news, while juggling multiple gigs to climb out of debt. Having to punch the clock even after retirement must be rough. A few years down the road, I finally kissed the mortgage goodbye and am now living it up as a bachelor at home. Today, my son and daughter-in-law are swinging by, so I've been on a cleaning spree since dawn. Just as I put the finishing touches on the place, the doorbell chimed. "Oh, they're here," I exclaimed as I swung the door open. My son and daughter-in-law were standing there, and my grandkid was sound